I'm Jenny Roper. I'm the new editor of People Management magazine. So if anything doesn't go to plan, I'm going to play that card of still being 2 months in. It will go to plan. It's going to be seamless. So guys, I'd like you to all just quickly introduce yourselves, only briefly, and then we can kick off with our questions from you guys as soon as possible. Danny.
So Danny Stacey and I have that very grandiose job title of recruitment evangelist working at Indeed.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Sharon Elliker. David will be pleased to hear I am unapologetically a career HR professional. So been in HR, with the exception of the first 6 months, I think, for all of my career. Really pleased to be here today. Until very recently, I was the regional head and VP of HR for EMEA for HP. But I've just changed roles. I've just moved into a global role within HP, and one of my new client groups is marketing. So I support our CMO and the marketing organisation around the globe. So this was a particularly interesting topic for me, thinking through the lens of me supporting a new client group as well. I'm pleased to be here.
Matt, are you ready to go?
I hope so. I hope this works. My name's Matt. I'm UK Marketing Director at Just Eat. Just Eat, for those who don't know, is a food marketplace. We deliver food, whether that be from independent restaurants, whether that be from KFC, for example, and various others. So, interestingly, sort of coming into this, my background, I spent 10 years, well, probably a bit longer than that if you look at the colour of my hair, but probably about 15 years in reality, working in digital marketing jobs of various sorts. But actually thinking about coming here today, I kind of followed the advice of both the speakers, actually. So I started on Google, failed spectacularly, and then went and found our HR director. And we had a fantastic conversation about actually life cycle and sort of our view of consumer life cycle versus employee life cycle. And actually, it got me thinking a lot about the subject and around sort of how our interaction as two functions can work together. So really excited about this.
Cool. And I'm Gemma. I'm the Chief Executive of the Marketing Society, which for those of you who don't know, we're very cool. But apart from that, we are an influential global network of senior marketeers. We run some 120 events around the world, all about how we can encourage our members to be braver, to be stronger leaders. And I passionately believe that everything's about people, which I think is why this subject is so great. Mm-hmm. And bringing people together, collaborating, that's when we can be stronger together. So yeah, looking forward to this discussion. But I have to say, as much as I love David's talk, I am a massive KFC fan, and it's nothing to do with finger good.
We achieved nothing else today. Group therapy around our KFC habit, collective KFC habits. Brilliant, thanks guys. So it's a bit of a different format for us at Haymarket and a bit of a different format for me, but I think it's going to work really nicely. So you guys have been sending in your questions, which is great, because then I don't have to think of them. And your questions are much better than mine. So I'm going to go in what I think is a logical order, and a couple of you have agreed to read out your questions. So I think we've probably got a roving mic. We have, fantastic. So I'll come to you as we go. But first off, Louise Nichols has sent in a question, and I think it's a really lovely place to start, which is why has marketing and HR become more closely aligned of late, or has it always been so? And Danny, I wondered if you could kick us off with that. So I feel like it's a topic we've heard lots about over the years, but is it something that's becoming increasingly important for both?
I'd say so. So in my role, been Indeed for around 18 months, and prior to that at LinkedIn, a lot of what we do is sit down with our clients from an executive level and think about talent attraction, retention, also development, that next stage as well. I think it's really important. It's very rare that we're sat around a table and we don't have representatives from both HR and marketing, and that is certainly growing. I think earlier in my career, maybe we might have just sat there with HR, and if we were lucky, we might get marketing on the phone for a short period of time afterwards. But I think the necessity to have the two together is only growing. I'm sure you're all familiar with Simon Sinek and his golden circle, and effectively leading with the what and the how, and then driving towards the why. And he gives that really great Dell versus Apple example. And I think the same is true now from an employer brand, from a people brand perspective as well. We know that consumers want to buy, they want to work with businesses that have a mission or a vision very closely aligned to their own. I think the same goes for people and for talent. They want to work for a business that has some kind of mission, culture, values that are very closely aligned to what it is that they want to achieve. It's very rare now that we're particularly thinking about Gen Zs and maybe the early stage of millennials, and it's very rare we'll ask people now, particularly coming out of, say, university, what do you want to do next? What's your next play? What's your first job going to be? It's very rarely we're met probably with a job title now. It's much more likely I want to work for a brand, a company. Do I want to work for a Google, for an Amazon maybe? Or actually, is it I want to work for a company that does this, that maybe has a real interest in terms of improving our carbon footprint, or has a particular nudge towards diversity and inclusivity. So I think the alignment is there. It's been there for some time. If you're sitting there thinking we're not aligned, you're probably in a little bit of trouble. You've got some work to do. But I think that alignment is only going to grow.
I'm interested, Sharon and Matt, on the ground. So as you progress through your respective HR and marketing careers, is it something you've seen? And Matt, I think you spoke to this a second ago. Are you seeing a closer alignment more and more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I talk particularly for Just Eat as a business, we're constantly evolving, and the challenge that's in front of us as a business is changing more frequently than annually, I think, at the moment. So we're constantly looking at our strategy. How do we evolve that, and how do we maintain relevance and develop that? I guess that position that means that not just from a consumer point of view, but from an employee point of view as well, that we are an attractive brand. And I think those two exist absolutely hand in hand. And there are increasingly blurred lines between the two. And I think what we see particularly, and when we're talking to younger consumers, is that their impression of us as a business is driven as much by our employer brand as it is by our consumer brand. So I think ours is always that challenge. And I think the way in which we approach that increasingly is looking at the various different groups who are consuming Just Eat as an entity, I guess. And that can be anything from shareholders, employees, consumers, etc. And we've got to work together, particularly with HR, with marketing, with various different stakeholders around the business, to build a brand that is inclusive of those and is appealing to those different groups. So we are, whether that's become closer, I don't know, but it's certainly something that we're working on an ongoing basis incredibly closely at the moment.
Sharon, have you seen the two departments getting closer over the years?
Definitely, yes. And I think probably the area that jumps to mind most specifically is in the area of diversity and inclusion, in fact. So obviously this is as important for the corporate brand in terms of our external audience as it is for our internal employer brand. And I saw a fabulous collaboration quite recently, actually, between marketing and HR at HP, which culminated in a wonderful advert. Unfortunately, I don't think it was played completely around the globe, but it is available on YouTube, and I would suggest you check it out, called Fathers and Daughters. And this was very much around, I guess, kind of the corporate brand, in as much as making sure that we were appealing to the various different segments that we have from a consumer standpoint, but also very much underpinning and reinforcing how important diversity and culture is for us as an employer and what we're doing, and just giving some insights into, I think, what it would be like to work at HP. So it is a fantastic. It's not very, very long. So Fathers and Daughters. I warn you now, you probably need some Kleenex with you. It's kind of thing that makes you cry. It made me well up a bit when I first saw it. It was very, very powerful. But I think it was a fantastic example of collaboration, where actually we were trying to appeal to our collective audience and recognizing that actually they're often one and the same, right? I think we've probably mistaken them for being quite discrete audiences at the end of the day. You know, our employees are consumers, and our consumers are potential employees. So I think it's important to look at them as a whole. Yeah,
such an important point, I think. And I think we talk a lot about that increasingly so, but it's remembering that in the day-to-day, isn't it? I think this question from Rhiannon Stafford follows up really nicely from this. And Gemma, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. So, we've established why it's so important for HR and marketing to have a really close working relationship. But often establishing and maintaining that relationship can take time, it can take resource, and you need a board, you need a senior leadership team who are also alive to the importance. So the question from Rhiannon on that note was how can we help organisations see the relationship between HR and marketing. So I think actually it would be nice to speak to that piece of maybe HR and marketing want to work together, but they need to make sure the business, the organisation in itself is aligned to that. Gemma, did you have any thoughts on that?
So I think it's a really good point. I think it has to come from the chief executive. It has to come from the leader. So the leader who sets the vision, is very clear about the values within the business. This isn't specifically the question, but what the purpose is, because consumers, employees increasingly now want businesses to be thinking beyond profit. It's about the purpose, and we need to be having bigger conversations about things that matter to us as humans, not just as marketers, not just as HR employees, customers. So I think if the chief executive is very aligned and sets the vision, and together with the C-suite agrees the values, then how that then permeates through the business is really important. And I think it's using the skills of marketing maybe to help that internally communicate. And I think this is where there's so much learning that we've got from each other. But at the end of the day, it's all about people. So if we're using a fantastic employing the way that we would employ a marketing campaign externally, internally, for HR to help HR engage using those tactics, in a sense, to get to the wider employees, to get employees to really buy into what we're talking about, because it's people at the end of the day. So it's how do you create that culture? I think it's from the chief executive first, and then using great ways to engage the employees the way we would engage customers.
I think that's such a fantastic point.
Sorry, just to jump on that one as well. And it was, as you were talking, Gemma, I was thinking of again something that David said in the opening around having a joint problem to solve, and I think probably that was what created an opportunity for us in HP within our executive leadership team. So we've been very passionate. I talked about diversity and inclusion a few moments ago, but it's a really, really important topic for us. It's a topic that our CEO and the executive leadership team discuss and review on a regular basis. And they literally were having a brainstorming session in one of their exec meetings around what we can do more substantially to kind of move the needle, because I think, like a lot of organisations, there's various initiatives we've been driving, and you're kind of running to stand still almost, or that's what it feels like sometimes. And actually, as a result of coming together to actively solve the problem, and it wasn't just HR and marketing in the room, it was the whole executive leadership team. They came up with the idea to actually demand similar standards with the suppliers that we engage with, that we expect within our own organisation from a diversity standpoint. And actually, it was our CMO at the time that took the lead on this. And he went out to all of the marketing agencies that we partner with around the globe and said, if you want to be on a preferred supplier list, and if you want to do business with HP, we expect you to meet certain criteria when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and to be able to prove your credentials, because this is core to us as a brand, both from a corporate brand and from an employee brand standpoint, that we want to make that real, and we want to hold you to the same standards we hold ourselves to, and we're driving to. And again, I think we had an interesting reaction, but a very interesting in a very positive way. I think people were like, "Whoa, this is really meaningful. It's really real." I think and we saw our legal department then do the same afterwards.
Oh, really? So it was, I love the idea that actually it's about the problem solving, and your functional discipline almost not irrelevant, because you're bringing certain expertise to the table, and all of that expertise is really relevant. But I love the idea that you're starting at the problem and then getting the people involved, and it's not about HR and marketing even working together. It's who do we get in that room. I'm keen to, sorry Matt, hold that thought a second. Sorry, I'm aware time is progressing. I haven't come to you guys, those of you who do want to stand up and ask your question. Laura Desert, are you in the house and up for asking your question? Brilliant. That was the point. It was all going to go horribly wrong when Laura.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So my name's Laura Desert. I'm internal comms manager at City Fibre. My question is, at what stage in a HR and marketing project should the other team be involved? How do you identify the right point at which to include the other team in your discussions and planning without it being too early or too late within the project?
Brilliant question. Thank you so much, Laura. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well,
Matt?
I think to a certain extent it does depend on the project, but I think if you look at what we did reasonably recently, so we were looking at our market level strategy for our UK business, and actually when we addressed that, what our primary challenge was to involve marketing and HR and certain other functions in the business right at the very beginning of that planning process. And that was really establishing who were those audiences that we needed to engage with as a business, and what would be our levers and our methodology that would help us to do that. So I think in that particular instance, when you are formulating your strategic approach and how you're going to execute in market, it's really, really important to have that at the beginning, because if one or the other becomes an add-on into the side of this, then it becomes a bit of an afterthought. It becomes, we should do something that sort of proves our sustainable credentials, whatever it might be, and that becomes a sort of something of and it looks like an afterthought if you do it like that as well. So I think it's as important as is possible from a strategic point of view to begin right from the very beginning, and then you can look at where you need to come in and out and how that's going to flex as you go through. But I think it has a lot more authenticity if you start it in that way.
I also think that if you start from the outset, then you have that sense of empowerment, ownership, that you're doing this thing together and you're going to achieve it together, and you've agreed the vision and you know what you want to, the objectives to be. If you come in later, you're not going to have that same level of involvement, of strategic understanding. So it just feels that it has to be from the beginning all the way through. That's why I would say. But I would say that with any project, quite frankly, that the key stakeholders need to be involved from the outset. Everyone needs to be clear about what you want to achieve, and then you achieve it together, and then you celebrate.
It's never too early. I think it's never too early. I think by the time, if you wait, it's a bit like baking a cake. Chances are your cake's pretty much already baked, and so your opportunity to then tweak the ingredients, it's kind of, and then if anything, it kind of creates a bit more tension, because they're like, well, why are they bringing me in? They've pretty much, they pretty much baked it already. Why do they?
Service.
So I think it's never too early. And you might say, okay, I'm not sure I can input just now, but when you get to this stage, pull me back in. But I would say, just never too early.
Love a cake analogy. I'm very glad we've achieved that of a Tuesday morning. Right, I'm going to come to another of you guys who wanted to ask a question. Do we have Julie Jones? Julie, fabulous.
Hi. How do you balance the marketing promise with the harder edge of people management? Do we run the risk of undermining our priorities and our promises? And should our future leadership development focus on marketing skills?
What a question. Wow. I think that's one for you.
Oh, how handy.
Who did we say would take the hard one?
Go on, who wants to go for it?
Wasn't me.
There's a lot in that.
I think in terms of, I'm not going to answer this very well, but I'm going to give it a go. I think from the perspective of developing that sort of future leadership, and we've been going through a process. And I'll sort of start from the beginning with actually how do we build out our future leader program within Just Eat. So how do we bring in graduates? How do we bring in apprentices? How do we start at that really, really early stage and to develop those people with the right skill sets? And we made some mistakes in that process, and I think at certain points we overpromised. I think a few people thought they'd be CEO within the first 5 years of being in the organisation. They're not, just for the avoidance of doubt. The challenge was actually how did we expose them to the right challenges, the right parts of the business? How did we give them that understanding of the wider brand that that we wanted to espouse as an organisation? And I think one of the key things for us was making sure that we gave them a very clear view as to how they were, what the various different elements of the organisation were doing. So they did spend. We unfortunately aren't in the position whereby we're moving people around in sort of blocks of experience. So we're not moving them into different departments for significant periods of time. But we ran shadowing schemes where they'd work with other graduates in other parts of the business. So our marketing graduates would spend time with our HR graduates, and our sales graduates would spend time with our commercial and our finance graduates as well. So we're starting hopefully to build a leadership pipeline that is reflective of the broader needs of the organisation, and hopefully we start to build leaders who have, first of all, realistic expectations, but also a pretty broad base in terms of what they need to win within the business. I think within that, that's sort of quite inward looking. We also want to make sure that they're getting a broader perspective, because our industry is changing at a huge pace and our competitive landscape is changing. So we're constantly challenging them to come to events like this, but also to make sure that they are broadening their learning base and spending time with people from other organisations, other graduate schemes, to make sure that our leadership pipeline is as diverse and as well built as it can be. I'm feeling I answered part of the question, but
no,
not.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Matt. You took one for the team. Very good. I wanted to come on. I feel like it would be remiss of us not to come on to the issue, a couple of issues of ownership, actually, if we're talking about HR and marketing working together in collaboration. And that was around employee communications, which I know often can sit in marketing, can sit in HR, can sit somewhere in between, and actually communicating and developing the employer brand. So let's start with employee communications. And this was actually, let's give credit where it's credit's due. Question from Paul Rose. So his question was, in most organisations, should employee communications be the domain of HR or marketing, or both in collaboration? I sense the latter might be what you guys are going to say, but maybe not. Danny.
Talking from experience, I guess, and I certainly won't be the expert here in terms of creating structure within an organisation. However, it's very rarely that I'm these days seeing people comms sitting within marketing. I think should sit within HR. HR, as it's being rebranded quite often, the people department, think should be looking after those people communications, but with the alignment, very close alignment with marketing, to make sure that everything has the same tone of voice as it does in terms of your consumer brand as well, in terms of the messaging that you want to put out there. I think actually of all the individuals and stakeholders within the HR team, it's probably your internal comms person that possibly is visiting marketing most often, or sitting in on marketing team meetings, marketing all hands, whatever that might be. And I think that's really important, because what you don't want is, of course, your internal comms completely at odds with then what your consumer comms look like.
I've seen both models, and even I've been at HP for just over 10 years. I've seen both within HP. Employee comms currently sits within HR. We have an employee experience team that looks at communications, recognition, engagement, a variety of different topics. I agree. I personally think it sits better within HR, but I think that's partly because of my experience, and I think partly because of the capabilities of the people within that team in HP that run that for us. And what I mean by that is we have communications professionals sat within HR. They don't happen to be HR people that have had a little bit of a foray into comms. I mean, I can whip up an org announcement like anybody can, right? But it doesn't mean I'm a communications professional. So I think we have skills now within HR that typically sat within marketing. And I think that also helps, to your point, it also helps then create and forge and maintain that really important bond between that team, if it does sit within HR, and the brand team that sits in marketing. So, but I'd like it sitting in HR, but I think, it comes down to making sure you've got people that are professional communicators. And I don't know whether in HR we've always addressed employee comms in that way. I think we've always thought, we can kind of do it. It's part of our domain, but I do think it's a profession and a specialism in its own right, and
Really
needs specific skills.
Gemma.
So I would agree in that HR should own it, but I think it's absolutely essential that the people that are running it are marketing experts of some kind. So employing marketing techniques such as understanding data, segmenting audiences, using creative. We saw 2 presentations earlier, one brilliantly spoken, one had whizzy slides. That's the difference with marketing. So I think thinking about almost having, what I'd love to see is like having a creative director coming into HR and thinking about the way to talk to employers in a different way, the way we think about talking to customers. Because if you think about large companies, I was thinking about this, someone said this at one of my events recently, the marketing director of Tesco's, they've got 500,000 employees. Now, they did a campaign which touched all the employees, but also their wider family and friends. That basically reached nearly 5% of the population of the UK.
Right.
So we're talking a lot of responsibility for those for that comms to sit in HR. So we've got to really be thinking about the right way to do it, and using the brilliant techniques from marketing to bring that in. And I think that's where it's a true partnership. So we were talking earlier before in that you support the CMO and sit within that C-suite to do projects in collaboration, and I think that's the key.
Really
is
interesting.
Working together.
Let's move on to employer brand then. So we've got a question, like I said, I'm moving on to some questions here around who kind of owns this. But I think we've established by now that both HR and marketing should be contributing very strongly. So this was Graham Trigg asked the simple question of who should lead on developing and communicating the employer brand. What do we reckon there? Where should that sit? Traditionally, again, with HR, I would suggest, but is there some movement?
So within Just Eat, our employer brand is owned by our people team. And I think that's the right place for it to sit. And I think they're the guys that understand, we go back to audiences, and they're the guys that understand that audience the best, and going back to what the guys were talking about before, having the right skill set within the teams is absolutely vital in building that. Now, we will work really, really closely with them, and we will help to develop actually how is that going to tie into our consumer brand, how does that tie into our investor brand. We have those various different stakeholders that we need to build around, but I think it sits absolutely naturally there. And I think, but we talked about this earlier on, particularly for us, our customers are our employees are our customers, and we've got a lot of 20-something employees who are also our customers. So there is a natural sort of crossover between those two brands. So we will inevitably, the people team will lead on those internal comms and they'll do that. But I mean, it doesn't hurt doing a great big Love Island internal comms thing.
I personally would enjoy that a lot. Cards on the table.
That's led by us, but that kind of, there are moments when they cross over.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right, I want to get one last question from you guys, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes to go through a couple of questions that are coming in from our live stream audience. So do we have Dominica Kimber anywhere and up for asking a question? It's going so well, guys. Right, I shall be Dominica Kimber. Any tips on how to build an employer brand? So I'm coming to this one because it is, again, related to what we've just been talking about around employer brand. So any tips on how to build an employer brand as a public sector employer? Danny, I'm going to come to you because I creepily know that you did work at DWP from looking at your LinkedIn.
You've been on my LinkedIn,
I've been on your LinkedIn.
I was there around 6 years, actually, with the Department of Work and Pensions. Very different life to then my next role at LinkedIn. To answer the question, actually, there's not a huge difference in terms of the way you go about a project like that. It's essentially the same things. It's doing your research, so it's knowing who you are as a business. What is your employer value proposition? What do your employers have to say about you, both your current and also your previous employees, your ex-employees? Once you understand that, it's an understanding what's that market perception of you. So who actually are you? What does everyone think you are? And then who do you want to be? And once you kind of know that piece all together, you can start to bridge that gap and creating something authentic as well. And I think a government department, a public sector environment, really you should be completely driven by your cultures, your values. You might not necessarily pay what maybe some of your private sector talent competitors might be able to pay. So it's about leaning on everything else that certainly is in your court. And I think it's the same for a lot of probably you guys in the room. You might not pay what some of your competitors might pay, but certainly when it comes to everything else, the overall offering, that mission that everyone's aligned to, hopefully that will tap into the talent you're trying to hire. And then that, after you've kind of done your research and you've got the authenticity piece in place, it's then actually that call to action. There's no point having a great EVP if no one knows what that is and no one's heard about it. And that's where you're, of course, then partnering with your marketing department in terms of taking that message out to those audiences. We hear all the time content is king, but I think actually kind of probably visibility in comms is queen, and she's really in charge. So have that really strong. I can get away with that. That's not sexist, right? I think having a really strong employer brand, is going to help you be successful as a business. It's going to drive profit as well. But at the same time, if no one really knows or hears about it through your LinkedIn company page, your Indeed company pages, Glassdoor, wherever you're going to market, wherever you've done your persona mapping of talent you're trying to hire, and you know where they sit, where their watering holes are. As long as you're having being part of the conversation that's already being had, then it should drive success, regardless of if you're public or private sector.
And communicating through those forums doesn't have to be I mean, a lot of the platforms you mentioned.
Indeed company page is free. If you didn't already, shameless plug for Indeed
that wasn't
here.
even where I was going.
Shameless plug. Go and claim your company page if you didn't already. It doesn't cost you anything to do. Of course, there's premium options as well. But you're right. It doesn't need to cost anything. I'm sure you've
walked straight into this. I blame myself.
You set me up. You set me up. I'm in marketing, not sales. But also thinking about, of course, your social engagement as well, and driving there, whether it's your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, whatever that might be. But having separate talent channels that work very closely alongside your commercial channels as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go hold that thought again, Sharon. Sorry, I'm keen that we can ask a few questions from the live stream audience, and then actually, I'm guessing some of you guys might have some questions forming. I think we've probably got 5 more minutes. Is that about right? Brilliant. So one that's caught my eye coming in from our audience remotely, this is from Nicholas. There seems to be a growing trend of companies using their people in advertising. What does the panel think is behind this? So obviously there must have been a really strong collaboration, I would suggest, between HR and marketing for that to be the case. Is there value in that? And then maybe there are some pitfalls and considerations that people need to make before they think, this is the way to most authentically communicate our brand. Sharon.
So, and actually this links nicely with what I was about to add here. So it's perfect segue. So I think it does, I think being authentic, and you used that word, and that's what I jumped on. I think that's key, whether you're marketing internally or externally within an organisation. And I think nothing is more authentic than the employees telling their own story. So, one of the things we've done to make our employee value proposition more real externally is to identify people and ask them if they will sell their story. So that is more around the employee value prop rather than the broader corporate brand. But they are real employees speaking in their voices, talking about their experiences. And I think that's a great example of authenticity, but also that collaboration between HR and marketing. Because I think before we would have probably wanted to go out with our little glossy view, and we might have done some kind of empathy interviews and what we should have done, because that's good practice, but we probably wouldn't have been bold enough to have our employees articulate that in their own voice. But that's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear the gloss. It's like it's like, well, you're HR, you're bound to say that. What do employees really think? And so I think people want to hear something that's real, that's authentic, whether you're talking about your EVP, whether you're talking about your corporate brand. I'm not sure we've necessarily used real employees yet in external advertising, but we're definitely using it internally, and we're also using it in all our images internally, with our standard presentation decks and any comms that go out. So before we would go and, like a lot of companies, we'd access kind of, special libraries of pictures and paid. Now the pictures you see, they're going to have real employees on, because it needs to be authentic. So I think there's value there. I'd like to see us do more of it externally.
But like you say, it could be something as simple as start with just making those pictures real life. I mean, that doesn't have to be difficult.
And as I said, and just if you were to check out our EVP and on ehp.com site, you'll see it's actual real employees now, and talking about their experiences.
Brilliant. I want to throw you guys the chance to ask any questions, and it might be questions that I had actually written down on my bit of paper that we didn't get to. Was there anyone that wanted to?
And I do own a different jacket other than just this pink one. I saw my picture and I thought, oh my God, why did I wear the jacket? I think it's the only thing I've got. I do have other clothes, but...
So you did the marketing for pink jackets very well today, Sharon. Anyone got a question they feel we should have got to by now? Anything they were keen to pick? Particular panel? There's someone right at the back. Brilliant.
Hi everyone, this is Tinem. Thanks for this lovely session. I already wrote my question, but maybe you already covered it. I'm a little bit late today, sorry for that, but let me repeat my question again. Marketing continuously evolves, as we all know, and how we can skill up our people within this space. How can we keep it productive for everyone?
Brilliant.
Thank
So
you.
question. Thank you very much. That is a really good question, and I'm glad we've actually got to it through you asking it directly. So a question around actually, how do we make sure marketing is so fast evolving in terms of the skill sets needed? How does HR help their marketing departments recruit and develop the right kinds of skill sets and people? Matt or Gemma?
Yeah, I guess from our point of view, it's a number of different things. First of all, you've got to find the right people, and that sounds a bleedingly obvious thing to say, but when we're looking at the background, we're in, I think I've said about 3 times, we're in a fast-moving industry, but there's a lot of ambiguity, there's a lot of change. You've got to find people who are culturally in the right place to manage that change. So having a sort of a straightforward set of marketing skills doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to succeed in that environment. So making sure that that's set up in the right way, I think is important. But in terms of retention, actually, I would say this, I'm sitting next to head honcho from the Marketing Society, but we want to work more and more with the likes of the Marketing Society to actually build out those key skill sets. So looking at what those learning and development opportunities are, how do we expose them to a sort of a wider breadth of learning? And I think it's the old say, it's really, really important to understand what's happening in other industries and to understand what's happening, I think, particularly in terms of the way in which sort of trends are developing and changing. We get our guys to spend a lot of time with some of our media owners, so they come with a little bit of a bias, but if they're going to spend time with Google, they're going to spend time with Facebook, with ITV, with others, that helps them to sort of get under the skin and to challenge a bit more, to spend time with agencies doing that. So it means a lot of time that you're actually asking questions, that you're sort of challenging people on the how and the why, and then they inevitably come back and challenge us. And I have several awkward conversations when I meet people from within my team who say, well, why do we do this? I've met with these people, and sometimes I just stare blankly back at them and go, I'm not entirely sure why we do that.
Yeah, and actually need those questions.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't that great? You know, having that appetite and having that curiosity, because things are moving at such a fast pace and it's very difficult to keep up. By the time you've learnt one piece of technology or media, the next one's there. So you need to find a way and have people that have that appetite for curiosity, where they just want to learn and exposed to lots of external sources, like events like today. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be opening our mind to you know, and events like the Marketing Society. Since he's plugging, I think I should be able to plug as well.
That's a free for us.
But you know, I know you did actually. I know. We're just confirming his membership at the moment. It's very exciting.
Consider it done.
Well, since I interviewed your chief exec, it's kind of, you know. but the point is it's learning from organisation like Just Eat and many of our other members like Unilever, Heineken, etc. You know, what's happening in the world, so we can then deliver that to our members. And that for us is so important. And I think that's what we all need to be doing as professionals, whether HR, finance, you know, marketing, is trying to keep ahead. It's very hard to keep ahead. So I always say to my guys, like, we've got to stay 5 steps ahead, because we've got to deliver to our members what they need to know, but they don't know they need to know. And the only way you can do that is by hiring brilliant people that have that real appetite for curiosity and learning and wanting to get ahead.
And HR can play a really key role in that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talk about in HP and have been for quite a few years now is just this whole concept of growth mindset. And it is critically important. I mean, you know, none of us ever knows everything, and there's always something to learn. And again, you know, in technology, in our sector as well, very fast paced, very constantly evolving. So, you know, you can't sit back and assume that your expertise today is going to be relevant tomorrow. You need to keep working on it. But I think one of the things that HR can do in partnership with the leadership, because this has to come from the leadership, I think, of any function, is also kind of put a framework around it. I think gone are the days where you just expecting to kind of grow and develop organically is necessarily going to be sufficient, because I think you're right, we don't always know what we don't know. And one of the things that we're doing with our marketing organisation right now is we've actually put in place a curriculum to enable them to become more digitally enabled. So, you know, we've got a digital transformation initiative, but we've actually put a curriculum in place, and we've identified different mediums, different channels, different content, courses, etc. And we're going to take people through it, almost like an accreditation. It's, but it's in-house, because I think sometimes you have to be really deliberate as well. If you really want, again, it's like moving the needle. If you really want to move the needle and try and be one step ahead, if you're kind of a little bit too laid back on it, I'm not sure you're going to.
You can't assume people are just going to pick up particularly digital skills,
and
where I
people
think there
are
is
just
an
really
assumption.
busy as well. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, managing your day job and then also managing your own development, that's like 2 jobs almost. So I think the easier you can make it for employees to navigate and to know where they can consume that content in order to continually develop.
We're going to have to wrap it up. I think people are literally leaving. I'm sorry, we could literally go on and on, couldn't we? And it's been so interesting. So just a quick, massive thank you to my panel, Danny, Sharon, Matt and Gemma. And thank you to Indeed.